On the night that the Taliban government in Kabul fell in 2001, an 11-man unit of Green Berets boarded Black Hawk helicopters and flew into the south of Afghanistan, into the Taliban heartland of Kandahar. They had two missions. One, partner with the then unknown English-speaking Pashtun who'd been living in exile, a man named Hamid Karzai, to turn the Pashtuns against the Taliban. And two, beat the Taliban in Kandahar, in their home base. Did I mention that we're only talking about 11 guys here? They are Operational Detachment Alpha 574. These 11 Green Berets, these 11 men, did something in 2001 that tens of thousands of Americans are trying to redo 9 years later in 2010. Their story and their success is told through first-hand accounts by these Green Berets and with the assent of the families of those of them who did not survive in a remarkable new book. It's called The Only Thing Worth Dying For: How 11 Green Berets Forged a New Afghanistan. Earlier I sat down with the author, Eric Blem, and Army Major Jason Amerine, who led this team of 11 Green Berets on this incredible mission. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. It's nice to see you both.
Thank you.
Major Amerine, let me start with you. The Taliban stronghold of Kandahar, it's the only thing that most Americans knew about Kandahar, about Afghanistan at the time that you were there, that Kandahar was their heartland. What was the plan to beat them there, and what eventually worked?
We worked with Karzai to develop a plan to rally the Pashtun tribal belt against the Taliban. The Taliban were a Pashtun movement, and the idea was to get the Pashtun themselves to remove the Taliban. Karzai believed that the Taliban would be rejected by the Pashtun, that the Pashtun would fight with him against the Taliban, and that's what we were there to help him with, to provide expertise, to provide air support, and basically help him to carry out his vision.
And how do you cleave the Pashtun from the Taliban in that situation? What's the strategy?
Well, the Taliban themselves did a good job through their ruler. I mean, tyrannical rule, the horrible human rights violations that were occurring. But the Taliban were afraid to rise up. And that was where Karzai believed that if he could get into the country, if he could work with us, show that there's U.S. support in his movement, as well as simply get all the tribal leaders talking to one another, that he'd be able to build enough credibility to get them to rise up, form a rebellion, and overthrow the Taliban.
How long did it take?
It took us about 3 weeks to do all together.
How many of you were there?
11 of us.
Eric, how did you find out about this group of Green Berets? Why did you decide to tell their story? And why did they decide to talk to you about it?
Well, I truly wanted to tell a story about the war. I realized, we all have watched The Greatest Generation, and now the veterans were dying off from World War II, and their stories were disappearing. And I just wanted to find and do my part as a writer to tell something from our generation. By just a strange, quirky set of events, I found out that a sister of a friend of mine worked with the brother of somebody who was on that team. And I found out, looking back in my records and I'd clipped articles at the time, that we didn't really know how Hamid Karzai came to power, and it was years later. So I found out that Captain Amerine, now Major Amerine, was working at West Point, and I offered to sit in on his class. And I went in and talked to him, and he said he'd be happy to talk with me, but first I should get the blessings of the family members of the men who didn't survive the mission. And that's what I did. That was really the starting point.
Of the 11, every single member of that group was either killed or wounded at this point. Major Amerine, I know that you're active duty, and so we have to keep that in mind in terms of asking you to comment on political matters. I'm not asking you to weigh in politically on anything, but 8 years later, the mission writ large in Afghanistan is counterinsurgency, with a lot of conventional forces, and of course special operations forces as well. Do you think there is an operational lesson for what you did, you and your 11 Green Berets did, in terms of the larger mission of what America's trying to do in country right now?
Well, our mission centered on two big points. One was offering the people of Afghanistan an alternative to Taliban rule, and that was in the form of Hamid Karzai. And to this day, he actually has a strong approval rating. One of the polls I saw recently that matched others was around 70% of the population approve of his leadership. So while
also thinking that the Afghan government broadly is very corrupt.
Exactly.
Those two numbers both very high.
Right, and that's one of the big difficulties is, on the one hand, they do support Karzai, but on the other hand, they want to see change. But in 2001 and today, I mean, having a viable government that the people believe in is key. In the case of 2001, they didn't believe in the Taliban. In the case of now, 2010, they actually still do believe in the government to a degree. They at least believe in Karzai, and he has high approval ratings, which isn't the same as popularity. Yeah. But they want to see the corruption at least diminished. It's so embedded that it's not realistic for the corruption to completely go away. It's probably going to take multiple generations. The other part that's critical over there is security. Back in 2001, when we put the Taliban on the run, there was a period there where the Taliban were retreating and there was just a vacuum. Karzai went into power, and that was the time when we really needed to start establishing security. And I think that we had sort of a false sense of security, pardon the pun. And that came to haunt us as Afghanistan was forced to be a bit of a holding action as we moved on to Iraq, and had to put a lot of focus there on the security situation. So as we're looking at it now, we need to get the government running properly. We need to build on the positive support of the government that is still there, and we need to get security established.
Eric, I know that in working on the book, you were able to meet with President Karzai in 2008. Was it 2008?
2008.
To corroborate some of these Green Berets accounts about what it had been like, on the ground in terms of this initial foray back into Afghanistan for him. In meeting with him as recently as 2008 and thinking about the mission that Major Amarine is describing, is he the guy? And does he have to be the guy? Does it have to be a leader that America believes in order for there to be a government there that works and that the Afghan people will support?
Well, Karzai, I think the reason why he rose in popularity as a diplomat at the time was because he was a person who could bring these different factions together. And really, he's that same person still.
Well, he wouldn't be where he is with both the opportunities and the liabilities without the sacrifices of you and your Green Berets. Major Jason Amarine and Eric Blem, the author of The Only Thing Worth Dying For. It's a fascinating read. Gentlemen, thank you both. Eric.
Thank you very much.
Major Amarine, thank you very much. Appreciate it to both of you. We'll be right back.